can we start talking some alternatives to coal seam gas? I don't know how many people know about Beyond Zero Emissions, but there's a group of engineers who've put together a proposal to have 100% renewable energy, so Australia being powered by 100% renewable energy within 10 years, using concentrated solar thermal and a little bit of wind power and biomass backup. Why can't we leapfrog coal seam gas, preventing us destroying all these aquifers and doing everything else, and go straight to concentrated solar thermal wind?
Thank you for that question. I guess there's nothing I would like to see more than that happen. I guess it's a hard ask to actually see that happen, but what really distresses me is the growth of the gas industry really deferring this transition to renewables, being used as baseload, being sold to other countries in a huge way, and rapid expansion, rapid using up of this resource. It does have advantages and it is complementary with wind and other renewable sources, but what we need to do is we need to transition away from all fossil fuels as fast as possible. So we need to be seeing the concentrated solar thermal power plants being put up almost at a faster rate than the expansion of the coal seam gas industry, as a minimum. So thank you for the question. I fully support the leapfrogging idea. If we can't quite get there, I hope we can get there as much as we can.
Thanks, and I think Raj would like to make a comment.
Look, I just wanted to say something in regards to the question before last. I can't sort of believe that Andrew veered from the party line of Santos, because that question's been asked so many times. Basically, as I was told, between 0 and 100% of the drilling fluids are never recovered. They have no sort of control over it. It's something they just sort of try for, and most of the time it doesn't happen. To prevent the contamination, Santos' standard line to me has always been that we use double casing. You know, it's fantastic. We've got a layer of steel, a layer of cement, another layer of steel, another layer of cement. But in America at the moment, the state of Pennsylvania has been asking for 3 layers of casing, and New York State has been asking for a total of 4 layers of casing to prevent all the contamination. I'm not quite sure if any of you are aware that at the moment there's a class action happening in Pennsylvania against water contamination. And basically the problem with Santos, and well, not just Santos, because the gas companies, is the basic technology they use can never ensure that contamination will not happen. There's just one other thing that Andrew said about how he was responsible for the Australian Stock Exchange. Well, with that, I responded to that with 2 right views. I've got more information off the Australian Stock Exchange than I've got from Santos. Thank you.
Sarah. No, the other Sarah. I've got 2 Sarahs, 2 Pauls, 2 Sarahs.
I think it's Queensland Government policy that there will be a coal seam gas industry. It's a political decision. There are royalties. There's no royalties in standalone sustainable energy. If you've got it on your roof, you pay for it, you fund it. The government doesn't get anything out of it, and that's the hard reality. So it really is up to us to demand those sustainable solutions.
Thank you.
Should we perhaps be looking at a response that provides real protective areas over aquifers or aquifers and those water resources, rather than simply shifting the bargaining power to private holders of land who happen to be in regional areas? Do we need to protect these resources for all of Australia?
I think that's a great question, and I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a 2-stage process. I think at the moment we've got communities who are crying out for their voices to be heard, and like Tim's community, they gather together, and giving them a stronger voice and a legal standing to have a stronger voice will ensure that actually we can put a halt to some of this stuff in the meantime. What we do need to do though, and this is where I think the water trigger under the EPBC Act is a really important aspect, because we can talk about the health impacts, and Rosemary referenced the class action in the USA. There's a growing body of evidence coming out of the United States around the health impacts of coal seam gas, not just the chemicals that are blasted down, but the chemicals that are released, the impact on the contamination of the water. And I was on a plane flying back from Europe a couple of months ago, and sat next to a guy who's a health professional, and said to me that he thought the coal seam gas industry was the next asbestos disaster. Now, that sounds quite extreme, but that's what he said. That's his belief, and he's got a body of scientists and health professionals working on this stuff, and that's what they're talking about. So there is that other impact as well. We do need to then, putting the health impacts aside, no, we've had a lot of questions about the chemical impact tonight. But the other key question is, of course, the dropping of the water table, and that's what most people here spoke about tonight. The actual dropping of the water table, which, of course, then impacts directly on our sustainable food production, on our water availability and our water security throughout the region. I do think we have to start having better control on a federal level, a connected understanding of how this stuff works. And that means being able to say, well, if we want to preserve our best farming land, we only have 4% of it in the country, good farming land, 4%, the whole of Australia. If we want to protect that, and we want to protect the communities that rely in those basin areas, then we do have to have a much better connected response, analysis and understanding. And it doesn't come from approving a couple of hundred gas wells here and a couple of hundred gas wells there, and oh, that's in that state and this is in that state. That's why at the beginning of the night, when I first spoke, I talked about the Murray-Darling Basin, because the same problem that we suffer here in South Australia, it's the same concept and the same principle. The river doesn't listen to state borders, the water table doesn't, and the impact on us as a community in terms of health and water and food security doesn't either. So it has to be, Joe, it has to be far more connected, absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah.
I actually think that protecting agricultural water resources is actually protecting the water resources of the nation, for the nation. I think when that water is brought to the surface on a sustainable yield basis, we have water sharing plans in place. They have created much pain, and there's been a lot of politics, there's been a lot of grandstanding, but now, well, certainly in the Namoi Valley, which I'm very familiar with, we have a sustainable yield that is acceptable. Our aquifer levels are actually going up, not down. But the food and fibre that is grown in that valley that goes to everyone in this country and other people around the world in export industries, I consider that water does belong to the nation. Those aquifers that feed part of the river, the Mukai River that runs through the centre of my property, from our pumping station on our shed is 3,382 riverine kilometres to the mouth of the Murray-Goulburn, and we are responsible with those water assets, as are many farmers. 30 years ago I couldn't sit here and say that to this community, but now I can. We have gone through a huge amount of reform, and I do not believe that the extractive industries are doing the same with the water resources. And I cannot justify, in my mind as a farmer, using water that can grow crops and feed communities to hose down roads, to settle dust, and to wash coal, and to be bought up and polluted through irresponsible extractive industries.
We are the driest continent on Earth. I think we need to be a bit more common sense about how we actually look after our most precious resource, whether it's above ground or underground.
This industry. I would like to know from Sarah and from Paul, how can we as a community get the government to take quick action now and to get the government to act to say, let's fast track the solar alternative for baseload power?
Okay, the action question.
Well, firstly, I think the campaigns that are being run in the local communities is absolutely paramount to getting that political shift happening. I think it's really interesting that it's not just in the rural and the regional areas in places like New South Wales and Queensland. I was staying with some friends in Leichhardt in Sydney, the suburbs of Sydney the other day, and they'd been letter dropped, I think maybe by some get-up activists. And it was about coal seam gas, because there's plans to have wells right under their local community. And they said to me, Sarah, what's all this about? You know, what's going on here? But people are starting to become much more aware, and we do need that absolute community activism and questioning of local members of parliament. There is definitely nervousness about this issue in the federal parliament. A few weeks ago, when there was a very direct question put by Alan Jones to Tony Abbott on the issue of coal seam gas, and this is because it's becoming an issue in the suburbs of Sydney. It's not just out there in the farms. And this question to Tony Abbott was about, well, why don't you give farmers more rights, and then we could actually get this stuff sorted out, work out what's going on, and people could actually protect their properties, their community. And Tony Abbott said yes. Now, so we decided, oh, wow, okay, the opposition are on board with this. Let's introduce the bill. Let's actually put this to the test in the parliament. If we've got support for this, we're in Nick outlined it already tonight. We're in a beautiful opportunity to actually get movement in this place, if we want it. So we put the bill to Parliament, and Tony Abbott went, oh, I didn't really mean that. What I meant was people should maybe get talked to a bit more. And so
Sarah, he's a weather vane. He changes
absolutely. He's a weather vane, somebody said. That's one word for it. My point being, there was enough pressure for him to say no in the first place. What happened over the course of 3 days was industry. Was the cry of saying, hang on a minute, Tony, who pays for your election campaigns? Where do your political donations come from? We can't be blind to that impact and influence. But the pressure points are there. And I do think people keep raising their voices. If we keep talking about this, if we keep raising the very tricky questions, and Andrew's been in the hot seat all night, and I think he's a pretty brave man. He's earned his money tonight, I think, coming along. But we have to be asking these questions, and I think people like Tony Abbott, people like Barnaby Joyce, the independents in the House, in the Senate, Julia Gillard and her front bench, they have to be answering the questions that are being asked. I do think we will get movement, but you're right, it has to happen now. Just remember the second part of the question, which was around renewable energy. And I guess that's directly where we need, we really need strong community support to ensure that once the price on carbon is introduced and the package for renewable energy, $10 billion injection into renewable energy across the country, particularly here in South Australia, because we've got beautiful sun, beautiful wind, wonderful opportunity, then we actually need to make sure the community back that, because we know, and this is where I'm going to be political, Tony Abbott's running around saying he's going to get rid of it if he gets in. Well, he can't. This is about the future of our country, this is about the future of our kids, this is about clean air, clean water and clean soil so that we can grow clean food.